Hi, welcome back to Tutoring with Tiana. Today we are going to be talking about factoring by grouping. We're continuing our factoring series, and I'm going a little bit out of order than the way that most teachers would teach this. So I'm actually going to talk about, like I said, factoring by grouping today before we talk about factoring other types of quadratics, so just so that you have all of the tools in your arsenal and then you can figure out how best you like to solve the other types of problems. So I'm going to give you everything and then you can choose which way you prefer to solve the problem. I am also trying out like a new audio thing, so I hope that the audio is better with these headphones. Let me know. Let me share and we will jump into it. So factoring by grouping is helpful when we have 4 or more terms. Through factoring by grouping, we can reduce this down to its factored form. So sort of similar to when we have a quadratic and we want to put it into its factored form. In this case, we have cubics and we're trying to put it into its factored form. So for example number 1, we are going to group the first two and we're going to group the second two. So out of the first two, we're going to think of the greatest common factor that we can take out of both of those terms. In this case, it's an x squared. And then we have to think about what we need to put into the parentheses to make it true. In this case, it would be an x plus 3, because x squared times x would give us our x cubed. X squared times 3 would give us our 3x squared. So you can always distribute just to check your work quickly. And then for our last two terms, the GCF is 2. So we're going to pull out a 2 here. And then inside of our parentheses to make it true would be x plus 3. One caveat when we're thinking about factoring by grouping is that we always want our parentheses to be the same. So what I mean by that is we always want these expressions to be the same so that when we write our answer, we can group the insides and we can group the outside. So when we write our final factored form, we would take the outside, which is x squared plus 2 from here, group that into one parentheses, and then we would take the insides and group that into another parentheses. Sometimes you can continue to factor from here if your quadratic is factorable, like if this guy could continue to be broken down. In this case, we can't do that, but in the cases where we can, we will continue to break them down. As a recap, we're going to group the first two, group the second two, take the GCF out of each, and we want to make sure that our parentheses are the same, and then we group our outsides, group our insides as our final answer. If we can continue to factor, we would continue to factor. Otherwise, this would be our final answer. Let's look at number 2. Again, we're going to group the first two. We can take out an x squared here. This is x minus 5. Out of our last two, we can take out a 2. This is x minus 5. We're going to group our outsides. And then we're going to group our insides. And this would be our final answer. Top to number 3. We can actually take out a 2x squared this time, so an x plus 3 on the inside. And then between our last two terms, if there's nothing that they have in common, then you would just pull out a 1. So plus 1, and then x plus 3 inside of the parentheses. We're going to group our outsides and our insides. And this would be our final answer. Number 4, we're looking at our first two. We can take out a 3x squared. This is x plus 3. Our last two. So in this case, we can pull out a 2 for sure. We have to think about, do we want the 2 to be positive or do we want the 2 to be negative? So ideally, we want there to be an x plus 3 over here so that we can group our insides and group our outsides. So in this case, we'd have to pull out a negative 2 in order to make that true. And then we can group our outsides and group our insides. Perfect. Let's hop down to the practice. I'm gonna just pop these two up. Go ahead and pause and try and solve these guys. Okay, let's check our work. From here, we should have been able to pull out an x squared. So we get x plus 4. From here, a 3, so x plus 4. And then writing our final answer, x squared plus 3 in one parentheses and x plus 4 in the other. C4, 6, and x squared, x minus 2 inside the parentheses. From our last two, a positive 5, and then x minus 2 inside of our parentheses. Group our outsides and our insides. Perfect. Hope this is what you guys got. If not, go back and try it again. But I'm gonna pop up the last two practice problems here. Okay, let's go ahead and check. From our first two, we can pull out a 2x squared. This is x plus 2 on the inside. From our last two, we can pull out a 3x plus 2 on the inside. Group our outsides, 2x squared plus 3. Group our insides, x plus 2, and our other parentheses. Let's take a look at 8. From our first two, we can take out a 3x squared, so x plus 2. And then again, this is the type where we have to think about, do we want to pull out a 1 or a negative 1? So in order to make it true, we would need to pull out a negative 1. And what I mean by in order to make it true is if we redistribute it here to get negative x minus 2 again, we would need to hold out a negative 1. And then again, we want our parentheses to be the same so that we can group them for our answer. So group our outsides and our insides. Okay, and then say for instance, for this particular problem, you didn't realize that you needed to pull out a negative 1, right? So you would end up with something like this. Let's say you pulled out a positive 1, negative x minus 2, right? And then when you go to group for your answer, you're going to look at your outsides. And then you're going to go to your insides, but then you're going to hesitate because they're not the same, right? So since they're not the same, we can't continue with our answer. That indicates to us that somewhere along the way, we didn't pull out either the greatest common factor or the correct factor. So this is kind of what it would look like if there was something that went wrong along the way. You wouldn't be able to completely finish the problem. I'm just gonna give you an overview of the practice problems. I hope you guys got all of these right. If not, go back and practice them again. Feel free to go back to the examples also. And then in our next video, we will talk about factoring quadratics that do not have a leading coefficient of 1. So I'll show you two methods, one of which is this method. So watch this first and then go into the other video. I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks so much for tuning in. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.